For the most part, the events you described, I'm not going to go, I can't remember every single one you thought of, but obviously those were dark days and mistakes in America's past. Look, our conduct of the war in Iraq, excuse me, in Vietnam, I'm going back to my early history. Our conduct of the war in Vietnam was based upon, in my view, in some respects, faulty information. We made mistakes there, and we've recognized that. But that doesn't ignore the fact, or that ignores the fact that in each case where we've been involved militarily around the world, we have done so out of what we thought was the proper intent, and not to secure for ourselves land or wealth. Thank you. Yes.
Go ahead, sir. Next question.
Okay. Thank you for answering our questions, Governor Romney. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on Europe right now. I know you spoke about the Chinese and some of the other countries, but it seems to me that some of the spending policies that we're doing and proposed taxes, the latest is Economic Advisor Volcker had spoken about a possible VAT tax. I'm wondering what it is about Europe right now that seems to appeal to certain political leaders right now, that we seem to be moving in that direction.
I agree with you. I think there's a sentiment on the part of a liberal stream in Washington that taxing the American people more is a good thing for us. And when Paul Volcker says that he wants to put in place a VAT, or would consider putting in place a VAT, I don't have his exact words, so I don't want to overstate what he said, but raising that as a topic suggests that let's find another source of raising taxes on the American people. I think we are taxed enough, and that we need to spend less. And that I do not believe we can possibly keep up with the promises my generation has made to ourselves, our entitlements as well as other spending. We can't tax the American people enough to keep up with all those promises. We're finally going to have to deal with the challenges head on and make these programs sustainable, as opposed to think that we can keep raising taxes and raising taxes. And it's going to be tough. I lay out in the book what I do with Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, how to make them sustainable, making sure that we honor our promises to our seniors. We're not going to adjust those programs for anybody who's retired or near retirement. But for people who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s, they're going to have to realize that we're going to have to change those programs to make sure they're viable and they don't get overwhelmed with taxes down the road. The calculation I have is that our payroll tax right now is roughly 15.3%. If we don't make those programs sustainable, that payroll tax would have to rise to 44%. Then you'd have income tax on top of that, another 40%. And then state tax and property taxes. You'd be taking 100% of people's incomes. We can't get there going the pathway of Europe. And I think Europe is recognizing the same thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Governor. I understand the Simpson Committee of bipartisan Republican and Democrats is formed to reduce the deficit. And I wonder specifically how you would address that issue of reducing the deficits and the unfair tax program. And very quickly, on another quick one, is how would you vote in this recent vote for the Lynn GE plant, which most Democrats have supported over the years, and our newly elected Republican senator just voted for, even though the Pentagon says they don't want it or need it?
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the Lynn GE vote. I do not favor votes for military procurement that are not desired by our military establishment generally, but I don't know the specifics of the GE vote, so I can't speak specifically to that particular vote. I can tell you that the way we're going to balance the budget is by dealing with two parts of the budget, honestly and directly. One is the small part, the 20% of the federal budget, known as discretionary spending, non-military discretionary spending, and that has to be frozen and reduced. The other part of the budget we have to deal with is in our entitlements, which is roughly 60% of the federal budget. And I lay out what I believe we have to do to adjust Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid for upcoming generations so that those burdens do not overwhelm federal spending and cause the American dream to be suffocated by excessive taxation down the road. I think those are the major areas, those discretionary areas. That's everything but military in the budget, and then the entitlement areas. And by the way, if we don't do this, the level of debt and the interest we're paying will ultimately swamp us. We're going to have to make some tough choices. I think Americans are willing to make sacrifices when they understand the importance of those sacrifices. I think we have to appeal to a sense of legacy to what we're going to hand to the next generation. I do not want to hand to my kids and to their kids in America where they can't realize their dreams. And so I think we're going to have to deal with those areas. Thank you.
Governor, is defense spending the only major area of the budget that you think needs to be increased?
Well, I would keep defense spending at 4% of GDP. Our total entitlements are about 10% of GDP, plus interest on another 2 points of interest. So about 10% of GDP. But military is 4%, and I'd keep the military at 4% of GDP. I'd really lock it in at that level, which represents keeping it about where it is. It's about 3.8 or 3.9 right now. And then the other discretionary points. If we lock these things as a constant percentage of GDP, we'd be fine. The problem is government keeps growing and growing and growing. It's about 35%. Federal, state, and local GDP percentage is now about 35% of the American economy, and on its way north. And at some point, you cease being a free economy when the government is responsible for 35% of what's going on.
Another question.
A pleasure to hear you tonight, Governor. There are some political and social issues on which I strongly refute your belief system. But at the same time, I have had tremendous respect over the years for your integrity as well as your executive ability. My question to you, sir, is when someone like me, who is basically outside the demographic, who would line up to vote for you, says that my first Republican vote would be for a ticket on which Romney is the leading man, do you have the ability to evolve into a national leader who thinks more than just his conservative base?
Let's see. I'm not running for anything, and that may happen in the future, as the first questioner posed. But I'm not in a position to talk about what I might do in the future in terms of politics. I can tell you that one of the advantages of writing a book is it lays out what I believe. And I find sometimes people, if I give an answer to something in a 30-second or 1-minute response, people wonder, well, gosh, is that different than what he said over here? It's all written down. So take a look at what I've said. It's all right there. And the things that I believe are in that book, and I don't anticipate changing on those things. Now, sometimes you learn that you were wrong. I indicated, for instance, that I believe that global warming is occurring, but I say I don't know how much human activity is contributing to it. My guess is that we're going to learn that over time. Am I right or am I wrong? There would be consequences to whether that data is as I think it or is not. I lay out what I think has to happen in education to get our schools better. If I find out, based upon experience, that something I believe in isn't working, then I would reserve the right to look at that data, learn from it, and take appropriate action. But what I believe today, and the things that I think our nation ought to do, are in that book, and that's why I wrote it, and I hope it serves as a prescription for those who find my arguments compelling. and you certainly reserve the right to disagree with me vehemently. Thank you.
Next question.
Mr. Romney, you were talking about authoritarian rule. I come from Venezuela, back in Latin America. I imagine Hugo Chavez sounds familiar to you. I would like to know what's your personal point of view of this socialist and communist regime that is taking over Latin America, and what would American administration do to overcome that situation, to fight communism and socialism and authoritarian rule in Latin America?
Thank you. Appreciate the question. Appreciate you being here from Venezuela. You going to school in this area? Or are you just working here or just visiting?
I'm going to school.
Going to school.
Yeah.
Great, great. Congratulations. Good to have you here. Let me tell you, just to give you my perspective on what's happening in Venezuela. I think it's an extraordinarily troubling development to see Hugo Chavez becoming a stronger and stronger player in Latin America. The wealth from the oil is allowing him to hold on to office, and he otherwise, in my view, would not be able to do so. His linkage with the Castro brothers is troubling as well. What I find very hard to understand is why we don't have an effective strategy as a nation to combat the spread of communism, socialism, and authoritarianism in Latin America. Why we don't have a Latin American strategy. Now, what do I mean by that? Coca-Cola has a Latin American strategy, all right? Toyota has a Latin American strategy. Companies